Hey, what's up internet? Gustav here from Cogito Creative. Today I want to go over the most frequently asked question people come to me asking about starting a YouTube channel. So it can be really overwhelming for people that don't know much about video. Maybe you're an expert in raising chickens and you want to start a YouTube channel about raising chickens, but you don't know anything about video. And I don't want that to be a roadblock for you. I want you to make the best YouTube channel out there about chickens. So this video is for you. I've broken this tutorial up into different pieces, and this one specifically is about the video aspect of YouTube. There's lighting, there's audio, there's editing, there's a lot of other aspects that I have planned to teach you, but today we're gonna start with just what you see. First, we'll start with camera selection. Some cameras have bigger sensors so that they have more pixels. So 4K obviously has more pixels than 1920 by 1080 HD. So that seems pretty obvious. 8K has more pixels than 4K. It's 2020 right now. You can still get away with having a 1080 picture for your YouTube channel. It is handy to film in say 2.5K or 4K to be able to crop and post, which is what I'm doing right now. We're filming in 4K and you can crop to make cuts or, just cool effects, slow zooms, etc. I'll cut to the chase. The camera we like to use, and which I'm using right now, is this beautiful Blackmagic pocket cam. I'm not sure why they call it a pocket cam. This would be a very large pocket to put your stuff in. Now this is a 4K camera. They do have a 6K version, but we bought this when it was brand new, so this is what we have. Obviously with this camera, you'll notice that it does not have a lens on it, so you're gonna have to invest a little bit more into a lens. Some of the best advice I got when I was buying some camera equipment in the beginning of my career was invest in glass because your body is going to be obsolete in about a year. We use micro four thirds lenses, so we're kind of locked into that style of camera, but we really invested in our lenses. This Voigtlander is amazing. It's not like $20,000 lens, those exist. This lens is about $1,000, but it was an investment, especially at the time when I bought it. So that's important, The glass is where you want to put your money. The body, this camera is about the same price as the glass, but there's a lot more expensive camera bodies out there. And this one is such a great deal. Yeah, to put out a cinema camera for just like a few grand is pretty grand. Another option for starting a vlog and getting started is a DSLR. So about when I was graduating college, this is gonna age me, but DSLRs came out in the market and really disrupted the indie film scene because of their shallow depth of field. So that means that you can get a blurry background, which is very cinematic, and these cost about the fraction of a cinema camera. So once Canon and some other companies like Panasonic really focused on video in their DSLRs, it was a game changer. This is a 7D, it's a Mark I, so it's very old school. We don't really use DSLRs too much. I take pictures, this is my photography camera, but it does shoot a great video. If you're starting out and you don't want to drop a whole lot of money on a cinema camera, start with just a DSLR. They really do the trick. You will have to record the audio on a separate device, or you can get a little mic that will plug into the kind of audio input that this DSLR has. We're going to go over audio on a different video, so just stay tuned for that. With this camera, there is an XLR professional audio input, so you don't have to sync the audio into video afterwards, but this one you'll definitely have to. And then finally, here's the third camera I would recommend, especially if you're starting out. It's called an iPhone. Yeah. All right, these cameras have really impressed me in the last couple of years, starting with like the 8, and then obviously the X and the 11 are just on a whole new level. I have the 11 Pro right now, and I'm going to show you what this set looks like filmed on my iPhone. So this is actually being filmed on my iPhone 11 Pro right now, and you can see the quality is actually pretty good. The colors are all right, so you can totally start your first YouTube vlog with your iPhone. This is proof right here. Boom, boom. So wow, you can really see that with just an iPhone, really if you have good lighting, then the phone can capture some amazing footage. And honestly, I would also recommend that if you're shooting with the iPhone, have a professional microphone. Don't use this internal microphone. It is going to be your detriment. but it has a great video. Record your audio separately, and you're gonna have to sync it up in post, but I mean, for saving all that money and not buying a camera, yeah, this is totally worth it. One big thing I want to emphasize is try to avoid using any auto settings, because if you move in the camera or go forward and backwards, the focus in the middle of nowhere is going to be like bzz, 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 and you're going to blur out for a second, and it's just really amateur when you see an auto setting trying to find the right setting in the middle of your recording. So once you start recording, you don't want any settings to change. You want your camera on as many manual settings as possible so that it's going to be smooth and consistent throughout the video, and you don't have to go in and try to change the exposure as the audio exposure was adjusting. You don't have to worry about that in post. Just straight up change one frame and then it'll be good for the rest of the video. Frame rate's important, but it's pretty easy. The two standard frame rates in America are 24 frames and 30 frames. 24 frame rate is used in movies and film classically, and it gives it that more cinematic kind of dreamy look. 30 frames has a few more frames in it per second, so it has a more realistic, true to life sense. So right now we're filming in 30 frames. I like to do a lot of blog videos in 30 frames, but if I'm filming a film, then I definitely want to go to 24 frames for that cinematic effect. The frame rate will affect your exposure. So if you have more frames per second, it's gonna get a little darker because your camera is trying to pull in more information, whereas if you go lower frames a second, it's going to allow that exposure, it's going to allow the light to hit each frame longer. So since we're talking about cameras, and I already mentioned the frame rate, but let's talk about the ISO and the aperture. Those are the two other things that are going to affect your exposure. So the ISO is basically the sensitivity of the camera. In general, you want it to be as low as possible, or whatever your camera has as a native ISO. So with the Blackmagic Pocket Cam, the native ISO is 400 ISO, so we try to keep it there, unless for an emergency, if it's super dark, we'll bump it up to like 3200 or something like that. But also aperture is actually the size of the hole in the lens that the blades create to let in more light or less light. And ironically, the smaller the circle is, the bigger the aperture number is. So f11 or f22 is going to be really small, and like f.95 or f1.4 on a lens, that's going to be pretty much as wide open as possible. But the wider your lens is, the more light's going to flood into the lens, and you might get a little blurry when you're like wide open. So maybe close it down just a couple stops to make sure those bright spots on your screen aren't glowing and you get that nice crispy edge. White balance is an important part of your camera setting because it determines the color tone of your final shot. It's pretty much the easiest way to change the look of the color in your camera. So generally white balance is on a scale from like orange to blue, and you know, the way the camera sees it, if you're set for indoor light and you walk outside, everything's gonna be like super blue, and it's gonna be really weird. You're gonna think it's on an alien planet. But vice versa, if you're set for outdoors and you walk inside, every single light's gonna look like a bright orange candlelit light. If you're gonna be filming indoors, you wanna make sure that you're about 3200 Kelvin or 3200K. And if you're filming outdoors, you wanna be about 5600K. So those are pretty standard. Sometimes I go a few hundred on or off depending on, like, you know, if it's later in the day. If it's at sunset, it might be a little warmer than you're used to, so you might want to just drop the Kelvin down just a hair. Some indoor lights, they're not all set to 3200. Our indoor lights in the studio are actually set to daylight. So you're also going to want to just take a look. What kind of lighting do you have in your room? If you have full daylight balanced lighting in your room where you're filming, then you're going to want to set your camera's white balance to more of an outdoor setting. So if you're using the preset settings, you want the little sunshine logo, even though you're filming inside, because your lights are balanced to daylights. You can fix that in post, but you're really stretching that footage, and it's just better to start with like the correct footage. So any color correction you have is a stylistic choice, and you're not fixing anything. You can just start with how you want it to look instead of getting it back to normal and then getting it to where you want it to look. Just get that first shot right. Lens selection. Let's talk lenses. And as I mentioned, that's probably going to be your biggest investment, even more than a camera body, because you might want a few lenses. So the two types of lenses that are easiest to categorize are zooms and primes. So this is a zoom lens. I think it actually came with one of our cameras, but as you can see, it will It zooms from 14 millimeters to 140 millimeters. So this is, when it's really small, it's a pretty wide shot. When you zoom in, it's like telescope into a tighter shot, maybe a portrait shot or something. So zoom lenses are super handy. You just have to watch out. This one is not a constant aperture. So if you zoom in with this lens, it's going to get a lot darker, and when you zoom out, it's going to get a lot brighter. So it's not great for on the go, but it is great to zoom, get your framing, and then start recording. If you're recording while you're zooming with this lens, it's going to disappoint you because it's hard to adjust aperture and your zoom at the same time. So just be aware of that. And then here's an example of a constant aperture lens. It doesn't look too crazy different, but the difference is if you have this at a 2.8 aperture zoomed all the way in and you zoom all the way out, the exposure will stay the same. I really recommend, if you're gonna be running and gunning and shooting on the go, you're gonna want a constant aperture lens if you have a zoom lens. So that would be worth the splurge. If you can afford it, I would highly recommend that. I got this used. I mean, if you're getting your first stuff, get it used. There's no sense in getting a brand new one. Things are so much cheaper used, and as long as you trust the source or have a great return policy, like refurbished stuff from, say, B&H or Adorama, refurbish is a great way to go. I just got something refurbished the other day and it didn't work, so I sent it back and they just sent me a new one. So I got a brand new device at the refurbished price just because I trust who I'm buying from and they followed through with their words. So you love that. You gotta love it. We talked about zoom lenses. Here's a prime lens. And so this is a 17.5 millimeter, and it's always gonna be a 17.5 millimeter. Although with our camera, there's a crop factor, so that's a little more advanced, but the crop factor on the pocket cam actually makes this about a 35 millimeters. Like the zoom never changes on this one. All you can change is the aperture, which is the amount of light let in, and your focus. There's no zoom ring on this lens. It's always going to look the same. So if you want to zoom in, you got to change lenses. So this is a 7.5 millimeter. This Laowa lens is super cool, really tiny. But if you need a rectilinear, because most wide lenses will bow the outside of the picture, it'll really warp it. But this 7.8 millimeter, super wide, but actually keeps the sides pretty straight. So if you want to go from a wide shot to a medium shot, you actually have to switch the lenses with a prime lens. But the benefit of a prime lens is that they tend to be a better picture. They're a little sharper. They usually tend to be a little faster, meaning they let in a lot more light, so they reach a wider aperture. We've always pretty much used prime lenses because we don't do many zooms in the shot. So you know, we like to plan our shots out. So like for a vlog, you don't need a zoom lens unless you want one lens to do everything. So maybe starting out, maybe a zoom lens would be all right, but honestly, it's not necessary. So that's about it as far as the visual aspects of your YouTube channel. This is just the first of many videos we're gonna do to help people produce some really quality content out there and get some momentum, get some subscribers and followers because their stuff looks and sounds so incredible. It's up to you to make some quality content, but as far as production, I want to give you as much information as possible to make YouTube a better place. Imagine that. If you have any other questions about anything filmmaking related, please put them in the comments. Email us, info@gocogito.com, or you follow us on Instagram @cogitoatl, COGITOATL. There's so many different ways to get a hold of us, but we want to know your questions because we want to make sure that we cover all our bases here. Up next is our lighting tutorial, and that should be coming out next week. So please check back on our blog next week for our lighting tutorials, and we will talk to you then.